Yo, what is going on, guys? My name is Jared, and it feels good to be finally back making regular videos on, a high quality camera, making proper videos, I guess. I'm in my home, my new home in Austin, Texas, and so I'm excited to be able to start making videos properly again. Today, I wanted to do an updated version of a video that I did last year where I took you through my Cinema 4D setup. So, like my plugins, my user interface, render settings, even down to default scene setup. And I wanted to update it for 2023. So, there are some different plugins that I'm using. My UI layout has changed a lot since I have been doing some work in other programs and have just kind of picked up some new tricks to be more efficient, because that's basically what this whole setup is about. So we're going to go through all of those different things, and then we're going to save them as defaults so that every time you open Cinema 4D, you can work efficiently and save yourself a bunch of time. So without further ado, let's just jump into a brand new Cinema 4D installation. The only thing that I have done is install the plugins that I use so that I can go ahead and get started by telling you what those are. The main plugins that I use at the moment, I've actually, I think, whittled them down a little bit. But as far as legacy extensions go, I use the TGS Texture Manager. That is a PBR plugin converter for all kinds of render engines in Cinema 4D. I use that pretty frequently to just point to a folder or put all my images in a folder, and then the material is basically already built and ready to be converted to whatever render engine I choose. That's the TGS Texture Manager. I use the Insidium Fused suite, so all kinds of different tools from Insidium, and same with Grayscale Gorilla Plus. And now that Pyro is out in Cinema 4D, well, I guess it's not R, it's just 2023, I think. I don't use Turbulence FD anymore. These are really the only three tools that I use. I render almost exclusively in Redshift these days, even though I like to play with Arnold and Octane a good bit. So that is really it as far as plugins go, and I just wanted to have those installed on the front end so that I could show you where I put all those buttons when we move into the UI part, which I will do now. So I think one of the best things that you can do for yourself is figure out how you work best and what buttons you do and don't use, and then set up a custom user interface based on those tools that you kind of use to be more efficient every time. So what I'm going to do now is build out my custom UI, and then I will show you how to save that workspace at the end. There will also be chapters all throughout this video. So if you really just want to see how to save your workspace and you already know all the customization stuff, you can just skip to that chapter, and then I would watch on for creating render presets and setting up your default scene. Let's start by just setting up the actual UI panels themselves, or all of these main sections. I like to have my materials show up at the bottom of the user interface like they did prior to, I think, R26 maybe, or maybe it was S26, I don't recall. And to do that, you actually have to come up here and turn off the new layouts, and we'll build off of the old standard layout, which has our materials right down here. I'm a Houdini user, and I really prefer the way that the Houdini attributes and object panes are set up. So I really like to I like to open Cinema 4D to a large viewport over here, and then I actually reverse the objects and attributes panels from where they are right here. So like if I add in a cube, you can see my objects are down here and the object properties up here. That's just how it's set up in Houdini. That's totally personal preference. You can kind of leave yours as they are. But this is how I like my panels to be set up. I like to have a big viewport. I like to have attributes on top, objects on bottom, materials below the viewport, as well as my UV coordinates for easy access. Next, I'm going to just drag this timeline up ever so slightly so that whenever I double click and add a new material in here, I can just see the whole preview as well as the material name. I'm going to delete that. And then next what we are going to do is create some custom button palettes so that you can use, or I guess you can add in buttons that are frequently used so that you have quick, easy access to them. So to do that, I'm going to come over here to a column that has buttons, and I'm going to right click and do customize palettes. And then we will get this command manager, as well as all of our buttons are now customizable. I'll start by just doing some simple editing of my top one up here. I'm going to move all of my render settings to the far right, just so that they're separated out from all of the objects and deformers and all kinds of things up here. And then I'm also going to get rid of the default lighting stuff from this top bar, so that these are all just my tools, my coordinate settings, and my world settings. And then objects, curves, all kinds of other deformers and fields, stuff like that up there. So these are just things that I'll use in my scene, and then my render settings are separate over here. I'm going to close out of my command manager and change my renderer to Redshift at the moment so that I get access to the Redshift tools. And then I'm going to reopen my command manager here, and I'm going to type in RS render view. I'm also going to add that up here to my render area. And then I believe we can also add, maybe it's just called RS IPR. Yes, we can add in the Redshift IPR. This is a lot of like play buttons up here. It takes some getting used to, but in general, this is just where I like to have all these different buttons. Next, I'm going to build a vertical column over on this side of buttons that I use pretty much all the time. So to do that, we're going to just create a new palette right here, and we will start editing it. On the, it's like I said, it's going to be vertical once we finish formatting it, but in general, first I'm going to want some of my most used plugins buttons, and then after that I will do stuff like Redshift lights, Redshift environments, all kinds of things that I'll use in general scene building, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to start by adding HDRI link plus. I'm going to add this in here, and then let's add in the Grayscale Gorilla Plus library. Let's add the TGS texture manager to bring open that window. Let's add in a button to bring in an XP system. It's an X particles system. I don't know how to pronounce the X particles thing for plants, but I think it's Tayo. But it's just called preset browser in here. I'll just bring this over here. This is just the preset browser for the Insidium plant generator. And then the last thing that I will add is a TF terrain, which is an X particles, or I guess it's Insidium Terraform tools. It just creates a terrain. So these are all of the plugin buttons that I would say I use on a daily basis. I am also going to add the Pyro object to this because I'm used to having a Turbulence FD container here, but now that Pyro is here, I can just add this into this. And so these are all of the things that I use frequently. I'm going to go ahead and right click here and click change orientation, and then I'm going to right click underneath and do let's do show text. And then what I can do is dock this right here. And now I have these buttons that I use all the time docked right here for quick and easy access. Now I'm going to do a group separator right here, and we will move on to some Redshift commands. Now is a good time, since we already have Redshift set as our render engine, to come into Edit, Preferences, Renderer, Redshift, and then to turn on the Redshift main menu. I like to have this up here because occasionally I'll like to just pop out this lights thing if there's, if I'm working on just my lighting or something like that. But along those lines, we're going to come back into our command manager and add in, let's see, dome. We're going to add in a dome light. We're going to add in a new standard material. Let's see. Yeah, so we'll just do the one that creates a new standard material. One quick change that I just made while I was kind of piddling around a little bit was I had a new standard material button here that was not for a Redshift standard material. So I just added in the Redshift material presets here so that you can kind of pick directly from what you want here. I'm going to put in another Redshift render view just in case I forget that my button is up here and I have it labeled right here. In fact, I will probably just take that one out and just have this IPR here. To get rid of a button, by the way, you just double click it. Let's add in a Redshift environment. I'll put this underneath the dome light. Let's do a let's do an RS volume. I'll put that underneath the environment. And then let's also grab a matrix scatter, put that right here. I'll move the render view to the top of this just so that we can kind of keep things organized. This is kind of Redshift system stuff. And then we have dome light, environment, volume, matrix scatter, all kind of scene type things. And then we can add in materials down here. The more organized you can be with these layer stacks, the more efficient you're going to be able to be in your day-to-day workflow. So that's just kind of why I set things up how I do. I'm also going to add in a Redshift area light. I'll put that right underneath the dome light. And really, these are most of the buttons that I use for this kind of scene building stuff. One button that I will add over here on the kind of like object and tool side of things, or I guess the edit mode side of things, is a button, very useful button called Center Axis 2. And that will basically center your axis to your selected geometry at any given point in time. And I just put that right up here. One other thing that I did just think of is to add in an asset browser button right up here, probably at the top of the stack that I have over here. And that, for the most part, is my stack as far as the user interface goes on my Cinema4D. To save this as your startup layout, all you have to do is go to Window, Customization, Save as Startup Layout, and now this layout appears up here called Startup, and that is what you will use every time you open Cinema4D. Now we'll move on to setting up the default scene, and this is what I think is the most interesting part of the video, where you can add anything into the scene to load up every single time you open Cinema4D. And this is where the kind of tips and tricks for efficiency really lie. So let's go ahead and start by just setting up some general scene settings. I'm going to hit Control-D on my keyboard to bring up the project settings. I'm going to set my frames per second to 24. And then I'm going to set my time max to, I believe I usually do 500. And that is just what is, a general scope of an animation for me in a lot of ways. Past that, I'm going to add in 3 new null objects that I can then create into folders, and I'll call one cameras. I'll call one lighting. And I will call this last one scene. For all 3 of these, I will come up to the basics over here, and I'll twirl down this icon thing, and I'll do load preset, and I want these to be folders, and I like the closed version. For lighting, I'll leave it as yellow. For scene, I make it green. And then for cameras, I make the icon red. These are my 3 general folders that I have every single time I open Cinema 4D. I'm going to delete this cube since we're about to make some other stuff. But these are the things that I like to have set up and ready to go by default when I open Cinema. Let's come up to Redshift objects, or no, Redshift cameras, sorry, and then let's add in a standard camera. Let's drag this into our cameras folder, and I will call this camera 1, because generally when I'm animating, I'll always start out with a first camera and then, so on and so forth. I like to generally make all my camera icons red so that I know it's kind of like a recording sign. I just know what is going on with them. I'll come up to coordinates, and then I'm going to 0 everything out to start with. And then Y, we will move like, or I guess it's Z in Cinema 4D, we'll go like -100. And so right now I'm just moving this camera into position so that I have it every time I open up Cinema. I'll come into the object, I'll start my focal length out at like a 75, and then my sensor preset, I will take to an analog 35mm camera. Next, I will add in another null object that will get used as the focus point for camera 1. So I will call this camera 1 focus. And then we'll just come over to optical, depth of field. We'll set our focus object to camera 1 focus. And then I'm going to alt click twice on these little dots here so that it does not actually show up in my viewport. And so now we have a camera set up that we can use every single time we open Cinema 4D. And yeah, it's all just kind of set up and ready to go. You can obviously do any of your own settings in here that you want. Like I set my frame rate earlier to 24 frames a second, so I should probably set my shutter time to 1/50. Likewise, if you want to make this a movie camera, you can set your shutter angle to just 180, and that will work perfectly as well. That's our cameras done. Next, for lighting, I like to go ahead and add in a redshift dome light that I will drag into my lighting folder, and I will call this HDRI. HDRI. I will turn off the background plate because I generally never want it when I'm just doing look development. Backplate does not need to be enabled. And then I will add an HDRI link plus tag to this. I will drag my texture onto the HDRI link plus. And then I will go ahead and set this to a user HDRI when I load them all in. I actually haven't even done that yet. But you can set this HDRI to whatever you want to be so that you don't have to do that every time you load up Cinema 4D. And then another thing that I like to keep in my lighting folder is like an infinite backdrop. So if you didn't know, Cinema 4D actually already has this built in. If you come over to your asset browser in the nodes tab, you can come down to geometry primitive, and then this thing called backdrop, you can just kind of click on the download, and then you can actually just drag this right into your icon panel so that you have it every time. And we can go then to Window, Customization, Save as Startup Layout to save that change we just made, and I can just create one. You have all your settings here like width, height, depth, subdivision, extension, all that kind of stuff. You know, what kind of depth you want to the actual bend itself. And I like to keep this in lighting because I don't really consider it part of my scene generally. Usually I'm using it to bounce or reflect light. And so I leave this in here, and I'll come into my camera view really quick just to kind of see where I should place it. Probably somewhere like, I like round numbers, so we'll just go to -2. And then I will actually just turn this off and hide it. And so this is a pretty good example of what I open my Cinema 4D scene to every single time. I've already shown you how to save your workspace, but to save the whole scene, you'll just come into Window, Customization, Save as Default Scene, and then just for good measure, I'll save as Startup Layout again. And then if I close this out, I will be able to open it right back up. And then you can see that we have our full scene that we just made. So the possibilities with this are pretty endless. You can kind of do and put whatever you want in this scene. If you want to, leave a full simulation set up in your default scene, you can do that. That's kind of the fun part of doing it. So I just wanted to do an updated version of mine and what it looks like for 2023. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.